She walked into the courtroom like it was a funeral, hers, and maybe it was, because the room didn't want her, not the judge, not the jury, and definitely not the man in uniform sitting across from her, smug behind the witness stand, a badge pinned to his chest like a shield made of lies. Her name was Mara Ellison, 37, accountant, quiet, alone. Not the kind of woman you'd expect to cause a scene, let alone bring a case against a decorated officer in the same town where he'd kissed babies and handed out scholarships. But today wasn't about expectations. Today was about facts. And Mara had brought more than facts. She'd brought the one thing the system wasn't ready for: memory. The courtroom was old, not just in age, but in attitude. Everything smelled like dust, like dead things that had been swept under the rug so many times the rug had become a mountain. The wood creaked. With history, the walls whispered. And the people? They stared, some with curiosity, some with disgust, some with pity. Mara didn't care anymore. She'd worn all their faces before. Smiled for them at fundraisers, nodded at town hall meetings, bit her tongue. At every PTA bake sale, when Officer Eli Rourke was praised like a saint, she used to clap too, back when she didn't know. All rise. The bailiff's voice cracked the silence like a whip. The judge entered. Judge Madeline Pike, silver hair tied, tight, glasses low, eyes sharper than law books. She didn't smile, didn't look at Mara, just sat. Be seated. And the game began. The prosecutor was a man with a voice like butter and a mind like a locked door. Daniel Griggs, tall, clean, confident, the kind of man who looked good losing because he never expected. He stood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "this is not a case about character. This is a case about consequences." He smiled at Mara. Or maybe through her, he pointed to Eli Rourke, a decorated officer with 14 years of service, a man who risked his life for this community. And now he's being accused by a woman with no criminal record, no history of violence and no prior complaints, of assault, coercion and misconduct. He paused for effect. Ask yourself, does that make sense? He turned to the jury like he'd already won. Mara sat still, her palms sweating against the smooth wood of the defense table. Her lawyer, Jordan Kessler, leaned toward her. "You ready?" Mara didn't nod. She just breathed. Her turn would come, but first they let him speak. Officer Eli Rourke walked to the stand like a man walking into his own kitchen. He was comfortable, polished, practiced. He swore on the Bible. Then he lied. "She became hostile when I pulled her over," he said, his voice calm, professional. "She refused to provide ID, refused to exit the vehicle, raised her voice, threatened me." He looked down, played the part. It was late, dark. She kept reaching into her purse, and I had no idea if she had a weapon. So I did what I'm trained to do. I followed procedure. Mara's stomach twisted, not at his words. She expected those, but at how easily they landed, at how the jury nodded, at how the courtroom absorbed his lie like it was gospel. He made her sound like a storm, but he was the thunder. She was just trying to get home. Mara closed her eyes and remembered that night. It was raining. She had just left work. The office quiet, her inbox full, her body sore from sitting 12 hours in a chair that didn't love her back. She drove home slow. No music, just the rhythm of her own exhaustion. Then the lights, blue and red like fireworks designed to terrify. She pulled over, rolled down the window, hands at 10 and 2, just like they tell you. He approached with a flashlight and authority. "You know why I pulled you over?" She said no. "License and registration." She gave it. Slow, careful. He asked if she'd been drinking. She hadn't. He asked if she was carrying anything illegal. She wasn't. Then he asked her to step out. "Is there a reason?" she asked. And that was enough. That was the moment it all changed. He reached for her door, opened it, pulled her out, pushed her against the hood. Rough, mechanical. She remembered the smell of oil and heat. She remembered the gravel under her cheek when he made her kneel. She remembered asking, "Why are you doing this?" And him saying, "Stop," resisting, even though she wasn't, even though she didn't. Back in the courtroom, he was still speaking. "I feared for my safety." She made sudden movements. She was uncooperative. The jury nodded again, like actors in a play that only he had the script for. Then it was her turn. Jordan Kessler stood. Defense calls Mara Ellison to the stand. The room watched her rise. Like she was doing something wrong by standing, she took the oath. Her voice was clear. Her heart was not. Jordan started easy. "Tell us about the night of the incident." Mara did. She spoke slowly, clearly, without rage, but not without pain. She told the courtroom about the rain, about the question, about the hands, about the fear. She told them about the words that didn't match the actions. The man whose eyes didn't see her, but saw a threat he wanted to subdue. Griggs jumped in like a shark. "Ms. Ellison, were you agitated that night?" "Yes," she said. "I was afraid." "Did you raise your voice?" "I asked questions." He smiled. To some, that can be interpreted as aggression. She stared at him, and to others, asking questions is survival. He didn't like that answer, but the jury did. Something shifted. A murmur, then came the video, because Mara had a dash cam. Not one built-in. One she bought for herself after watching one too many viral videos where truth was caught in pixels. She'd handed it over months ago, and it took a subpoena and a court order to retrieve it from evidence. But Jordan had it now, and he played it. The courtroom watched the real story. No resistance, no threats, just a woman, tired, asking why, and a man using a badge like a fist. The audio was low, but the video was loud. The jury leaned in. The judge leaned back, and Griggs stopped smiling. Mara didn't cry. Not then. She waited until the lights came back on and the screen went black. She waited until the room looked at her like she mattered, like maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth, and that was only the beginning. The courtroom wasn't quiet after the video ended. Not really. It was a silence that buzzed, like someone had just kicked a hornet's nest and no one knew what would fly out. Mara sat down slowly, her knees stiff from tension. But she didn't break. She couldn't. She hadn't come all this way to fold under stares and side eyes and silence. Judge Pike cleared her throat. "We'll take a 10-minute recess." "Counsel, approach." Jordan leaned toward her. "You cracked something," he whispered. She nodded once, not like a warrior, like someone still bleeding, but willing to fight. In the hallway, the press had gathered. They hadn't cared much before. A cop and a woman. Old news. But now there was footage. Now there was a story. "Mara, do you believe the officer targeted you?" "Ms. Ellison, do you plan to sue the department? Were you resisting arrest?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She let the silence speak louder than spin. Jordan turned to her, voice low. "They're gonna come harder now. This is where they get vicious. You ready?" "I wasn't ready when it happened," she said. But it didn't stop him. Back inside, Eli Rourke was back on the stand. Different now, less polished, less in control. The video had stripped. The veneer. He was still trying to wear the uniform like armor, but armor doesn't work when the truth has already pierced it. Griggs stood like he'd rehearsed this in the mirror. "Detective Rourke, can you explain the discrepancies between your report and the footage?" Eli blinked. "I was under pressure. It was late. Your memory says she reached. The video says she didn't. She was confrontational. The video says she wasn't. You lied," Griggs snapped. And suddenly, Mara wasn't the only one on trial. The judge intervened. "Counselor, control your tone." Griggs straightened. "Apologies, Your Honor." But the damage was done. Eli wasn't a witness anymore. He was a defendant in everything but name. Jordan called their next witness, a man named Brian Kelter, IT contractor, former city employee, a quiet man with a soft voice and a conscience that wouldn't shut up. He was the one who found the missing New footage. The one who noticed the altered report logs from inside the department's server. They told him to keep quiet. He didn't. He sat with both hands gripping the table like he was afraid the truth might float away if he didn't hold it down. I noticed the tampering, he said. Log files were edited, time-stamped entries overwritten. By who? He hesitated. Detective Rourke's credentials were used. Gasps. Mara didn't flinch. She already knew. Griggs jumped in. Mr. Kelter, are you a tech expert or a detective? Jordan stood before he could finish. Objection, that's not the question. Sustained, Brian continued. Calm, steady, like someone who'd finally exhaled after holding their breath for a year. And then he said the words that changed the tone of the trial completely. This wasn't the first time the footage was tampered with. The room twisted. Excuse me? Judge Pike asked. There were similar anomalies in at least 3 other cases. Griggs turned pale. Jordan smiled faintly. Mara, she folded her hands. Because now it wasn't just about her. The recess was longer this time. Inside a side chamber, Jordan faced her. They're going to want to settle, she frowned. For what? Quiet. An offer came on day 4. Dismiss the charges, issue a public apology, seal the records. It was everything someone would ask for, except Mara didn't. As she stood, tell them no. The next morning, she testified again. This time, not about the night of the arrest. This time, about what came after. The job she lost. The friends who ghosted her. The landlord who handed her an eviction notice after the story hit the news. How? Every time she applied for another position, her name came up tagged with arrest. No one asked if the charges were dropped. No one cared. She became the villain in a story someone else had written. I stopped going outside, she said. I started ordering groceries at midnight, crossing streets when I saw squad cars. Not because I was guilty, but because I knew that badge meant I could be ruined all over again. Her voice didn't tremble. Not once, and the jury looked at her like people finally seeing a person instead of a headline. Griggs tried to shake her. You're clearly upset, Miss Ellison. Could it be that your emotions have colored your recollection? She looked at him, not with anger, with pity. Do you think fear is a memory lapse? Do you think trauma is a coloring book? The courtroom went still. The judge didn't stop her. Jordan didn't interrupt. Because they knew this was the moment. The whole truth stepped into the room. I didn't come here to ruin a man's life, she said. I came here because mine was ruined, and no one said sorry. When she stepped down, the jury didn't look away. That was new. Day 5 brought another surprise witness, Officer Colleen Marsh, retired, decorated, and ready to tell the truth. She'd been sitting on for 6 years. She spoke of blue silence, of pressure to back reports, even when they didn't match what she saw, of internal affairs cases buried before they hit paper, and of Rourke, his reputation for compliance. The unofficial nickname, the Eraser, because complaints disappeared when he touched them. Her testimony cracked the case wide open, and Mara, she watched it happen like someone watching their own name being scrubbed clean in real time. By the end of the day, Griggs looked less like a lion and more like a man trying to stop a flood with a paper umbrella. In the hallway, a reporter shoved a mic toward her. Ms. Ellison, if the verdict goes your way, what next? She smiled. Then I go home, and maybe I start breathing again. The courtroom wasn't the only battlefield. It was just the most visible one, because outside the city had started talking. Whispers turned to hashtags, comments turned into conversations. And the name Mara Ellison no longer meant defendant. It meant something else, something dangerous to those who'd gotten used to silence. The department issued a statement. Pending investigation. Committed to transparency. Officer Rourke placed on administrative leave. But Mara knew what those words really meant. Delay, deflect, dismiss. Back inside the courtroom, the defense table felt colder. She hadn't slept, she hadn't eaten, but she had fire, and that was enough. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The day's session resumed. But the mood had changed. Even the jury didn't look the same. They didn't glance away when she passed. They didn't shrink when her name was read. That's what truth does, even when it hurts. It wakes people up. Jordan called. The next witness, Ava Bricks, Mara's former co-worker. Mid-30s, sharp voice, sharper memory. She walked like someone who used to be afraid, but wasn't anymore. Do you remember the day Mara was arrested? Jordan asked. Ava nodded. I do. She didn't come into work the next day. We thought she was sick. Then we saw her face on the news. Did you believe the story? I wanted to, she said. I wanted to believe it wasn't her. But it was too detailed, too official. Jordan stepped closer. And then I visited her, and she told me everything, showed me the footage. That's when I knew we weren't looking at justice. We were looking at strategy. Griggs tried to rattle her. You're her friend, Ms. Bricks. Isn't it possible you're biased? Ava looked at him. You want to talk about bias? Maybe ask why Officer Rourke's initial report was accepted without question, but her voice took 3 court dates to be heard. Mick dropped, and the court heard it. After Ava came Henry Dawes, an independent video analyst. He verified the footage. The metadata, the audio, the edits, said the video Rourke originally submitted had been trimmed. By how much? The judge asked. 17 seconds, he replied. And what was in those seconds? Ms. Ellison asking why she was being detained, and Officer Rourke pulling her from the vehicle without verbal warning. 17 seconds. That's all it took to change a story, to turn truth into threat, victim into villain. Mara sat still, but inside she was vibrating. They didn't just try to break her. They rewrote her, and now, piece by piece, she was writing herself back. Then came something no one expected. An anonymous letter, slipped under the courtroom doors, typed, unsigned, but real. Jordan received it during the lunch break. He showed it. To Mara, it's a statement from another officer. Mara scanned it, claimed Rourke had doctored at least 5 reports. Said he coached rookies on how to write narratives that protected the badge. Same language, same phrases. Feared for my safety. Subject was non-compliant. Resisted verbal commands. A script, used over and over. The judge allowed it under sealed testimony. Jordan read it aloud. The courtroom listened like it was hearing prophecy. You see, Mara whispered to herself, this wasn't just about me. This was about how easy it was to make me disappear. Griggs objected, said it was hearsay, said it couldn't be verified. The judge agreed, but let the record show the statement existed. Even if it wouldn't sway the verdict, it had already shifted the story. Day 6 arrived, and Mara took the stand one last time. Not as a witness, not as a defendant, as the center of gravity. She looked at the jury, and she told them what this really cost. Not just the job, not just the reputation, but the certainty. I used to believe if you told the truth would protect you, she said. She paused. But the truth doesn't wear armor, and it doesn't come with backup. It needs us, people, to carry it. She talked about the nights she didn't sleep, the people who stopped calling, the fear that followed her even in daylight, how she stopped trusting reflections because even her mirror didn't recognize her anymore. I was erased, she said, and then I came back. When she stepped down, even the judge's gavel sounded different, less like a command, more like a punctuation mark. The defense rested, and the jury went out. Hours passed. The city waited. So did Mara. She sat on a bench outside the courtroom. Hands clasped, phone off, world paused. Then the door opened. A court officer walked out, solemn, measured. Ms. Ellison, they're ready. She stood, heart loud, breath tight, and walked in. The jury foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant. Breath out, not guilty on all charges. The room didn't cheer. It didn't need to. Some victories are quiet. Some justice arrives without fireworks. Just breath finally released. Mara sat, hands shaking. Jordan leaned over. "You did it." But she knew better. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning, because in the crowd she saw other eyes. Women, men, people who had been rewritten, who saw themselves in her story, and now they were holding pens. The next morning, her name was everywhere, not just headlines, but hashtags, speeches, news specials, but Mara didn't read them. She went for a walk, first one in months. No hoodie, no rush, no fear, just her, finally seen, finally real. And the badge that tried to bury her, it cracked, one story at a time. They cleared the courtroom, but the echo stayed. Mara walked out free, but not light, not yet. Because justice doesn't unwrite trauma. It doesn't scrub pain from bone. It only shifts the weight from accusation to recognition. Outside, the reporters flooded the steps. Mics extended like weapons. Flashes popped like gunfire. Everyone wanted the quote, the victory line. The headline soundbite, but Mara didn't give them that. All she said was, it shouldn't take this much to be believed. And with that, she disappeared. Back into her life, or what was left of it. She went home to a mailbox still full of bills. Emails still unanswered. Plants dead from neglect. You win a courtroom, but the world outside doesn't always clap for it. She filed a formal complaint against Rourke. Civil, not criminal, because criminal charges move slower than lies. But people were watching now, and watching changed things. She didn't want money. She wanted policy, change, accountability. She wanted them to feel what it was like to be exposed. And something strange happened. Others began to speak. The city held a press conference. Interim chief, mayor, legal department. They called it an internal review. Said they were deeply concerned. Said they were committed to rebuilding trust. Mara watched it from her living room. She didn't believe them, but she did believe in what came next. The DA's office reopened 4 old cases, all of them involving Officer Eli Rourke, all with patterns that looked eerily familiar. One of them was Camille Strauss, age 29, teacher, pulled over for a broken taillight, arrested for resisting, lost her job, lost custody of her son for 6 months. Another was Tyrone Westley, a delivery driver, accused of drug possession after a routine search. Later cleared when warehouse footage proved he'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. By design, Mara didn't know them, but they knew her. They sent her messages, emails, letters, thank yous wrapped in pain. "You cracked the door," one said. "We're kicking it open." Eli Rourke stayed silent. He refused interviews. His lawyer handled all statements. But inside the department there was noise, big noise, whispers of other officers getting nervous, deleting emails, calling in favors, trying to get ahead of a storm they helped build. And in the midst of it all, Mara was asked to speak at universities, at reform panels, on podcasts, at rallies. She didn't call herself an activist, but people handed her the mic anyway, and she didn't drop it. She spoke plainly, not with slogans, not with applause lines. She told people what it cost, not just to fight, but to survive the fight. Justice isn't just winning a case, she said. It's being able to walk outside without a narrative written on your back. Meanwhile, the civil case moved forward. Depositions, delays, legal tactics designed to exhaust her, but she didn't quit. She had help now, a team, funded by donations from people who didn't know her but knew what she represented. And that's when the leak happened, an email dump from the department. Anonymous source, hundreds of internal documents, training manuals, complaint suppression techniques, a list of officers flagged for misconduct, but never disciplined. And Rourke? He was on there 7 times. The city scrambled, apologies, investigations. One supervisor resigned, another retired, and Rourke finally arrested. Obstruction, evidence tampering, civil rights violations. It didn't erase what happened, but it meant something. Mara watched the news from a cafe window. Laptop open, phone off, the footage played on mute. But she didn't need sound to understand it. She just sipped her tea and stared at the screen like someone watching a chapter close. But her story wasn't done. One night she got a call from a woman named Delia Brooks, mother, retired nurse. Wanted to talk. They met at a quiet bookstore off the freeway. Delia brought a folder, inside photos, reports. Another case, Delia's son, Isaiah, shot during a wellness check. Police said he charged. Video showed he was asleep on the couch when they broke the door down. Delia said, "I don't want to go to court. I want the world to know what they did to him." Mara said, "Then let's tell it." They started small, articles, posts, a short documentary. It spread, because truth is contagious when someone's already cracked the silence. Mara started an organization, Echo File, a digital archive of stories buried by the system, a place for the erased to rewrite themselves. And people came, with evidence, with scars, with courage. She hired analysts, researchers, legal consultants, survivors. Together, they turned pain into pressure, and pressure into policy. In 2 years, they filed more than 70 support briefs, backed lawsuits, advised policy boards, helped pass 2 major reforms in her state. Not because Mara wanted power, she just wanted people to stop disappearing. Then one day, a young girl walked up to her after a talk at a university. She was maybe 19, book bag on, eyes lit with something fragile. She said, "My brother's in jail. They said he confessed, but he didn't. Your story helped me look closer." She handed Mara a file. Inside, a transcript, poorly written, clearly coerced. And Mara thought, here we go again, because the truth doesn't retire, and justice never comes on time. But it comes when you keep showing up. She never got an apology from the city. Never got an "I'm sorry" from Rourke. Never even got a letter from the department that let him roam free for over a decade. But she didn't need it, because the courtroom didn't erase her. It revealed her. And now, she was the one writing the record. By the time the city called for a public oversight hearing, the media had stopped calling her a woman accused of lying. Now they called her something else. The woman who wouldn't disappear. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Packed hall, camera crews, security lined up like it was a protest about to pop. But it wasn't a protest. It was a reckoning. Inside were the city's most powerful police commissioners, district attorneys, union representatives, politicians who once pretended not to. Know her name now, sitting with their backs straight, knowing every sentence was being streamed live and at the front of the room. Mara, hair tied back, suit clean, eyes sharper than any gavel. She took her seat like she belonged there, because she did. The chairwoman tapped the mic. This hearing will determine the scope of misconduct within the department, evaluate past complaints, and establish grounds for systemic reform. She looked down the table. "Ms. Ellison, thank you for being here. You may begin." Mara stood. No notes, no script, just memory, and the truth she never asked for but could never forget. "I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because no one listened when it mattered." She looked around the room. "You all have read the reports, seen the footage, heard the testimonies, but you haven't seen the impact." She pointed toward the gallery. "That's the impact. Mothers, sons, teachers, drivers, people who walk through life hoping not to be rewritten." She spoke for 15 minutes straight about the arrest, the courtroom, the aftermath, the letters she receives weekly, the people who still haven't gotten a day in court. She ended with this: "You don't need another task force. You need courage." Then she sat down. There was silence, but not the kind that shrinks, the kind that swells. Then came the questioning. Councilwoman Reed, a skeptic in a navy blazer, leaned forward. "You've made serious claims. You're essentially accusing the system of being complicit in abuse." Mara didn't blink. "I'm not accusing it. I'm describing it." Reed pressed on. What do you propose? What does accountability actually look like to you? Mara folded her hands. It looks like cases reopened, officers retrained, complaints independently investigated, and people who lie on reports held to the same standards as the people they arrest. Applause rippled from the back. The chairwoman tapped the mic again. Order! But the tone had shifted. Again. The police union president Carl Vexley stepped forward, red-faced, tense. He called her dangerous, said her story had damaged morale, that it demonized an entire profession. Mara stood again. I never demonized anyone. I described what happened to me. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't the story. Maybe it's the system that made it possible. By the time she left the chamber, she didn't feel like a victim anymore, or even a survivor. She felt like a start. That night, the clip of her exchange with Vexley went viral, shared by senators, celebrities, civic leaders. You don't need another task force, you need courage, became a rallying cry. And EchoFile, its membership tripled in 48 hours. The city launched a formal independent audit of its police force. They didn't say Mara's name in the announcement, but she heard it anyway. Weeks passed. Rourke's trial was set. It wouldn't be flashy, wouldn't have the crowd of her case, but it was real, tampering, falsification, civil rights obstruction, charges that stuck. She wasn't invited to testify, but she showed up anyway, sat in the gallery, watched him enter. Still smug, still polished, but this time he looked small. The evidence was airtight, thanks to her, to EchoFile, to a few brave techs who dug into logs no one was supposed to find. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, all. Counts. She didn't clap, didn't smile, just exhaled. One long, slow breath that had been building for years. Rourke appealed. Of course he did, but the appeal failed. His badge was stripped, his pension frozen, his record marked. And Mara? She walked out of court that day not as his accuser, but as the reason he'd never do it again. EchoFile evolved. Now a legal consultancy, a media firm, a public archive. They were working with 6 other cities, 3 pending lawsuits, 2 policy packages, and then came the call from Washington, a congressional subcommittee requesting her presence for a hearing on police accountability and reform. She was stunned, not because they asked, but because the system that once tried to erase her now needed her signature on something they couldn't ignore. In D.C., she wore the same suit she wore in her own trial. She stood behind a desk in a room filled with cameras and power-dressed. In red, white, and blue. She wasn't nervous, she was ready. I'm not here to take your jobs, she said. I'm here to make sure you do them. She laid out policy recommendations, transparency standards, evidence archiving rules, independent complaint review boards. She ended with, this isn't about one officer. It's about what happens when good people stay silent because the system tells them the truth isn't worth the noise. She left to a standing ovation, not because she gave a speech, but because she told a story that couldn't be ignored anymore. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment in a city she'd never been to, a young man watched the clip on a cracked phone screen and whispered to himself, "Me too." Mara wouldn't meet him, but she fought for him, like someone once fought for her. The system still wasn't perfect. Complaints still got buried. Laws still lagged. Voices still broke before they were heard. But now, there were more of them, because one woman didn't fold. By the time the city called for a public oversight hearing, the media had stopped calling her a woman accused of lying. Now they called her something else, the woman who wouldn't disappear. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Packed hall, camera crews. Security lined up like it was a protest about to pop. But it wasn't a protest, it was a reckoning. Inside were the city's most powerful, police commissioners, district attorneys, union representatives, politicians who once pretended not to. Know her name now, sitting with their backs straight, knowing every sentence was being streamed live. And at the front of the room, Mara, hair tied back, suit clean, eyes sharper than any gavel. She took her seat like she belonged there, because she did. The chairwoman tapped the mic. This hearing will determine the scope of misconduct within the department, evaluate past complaints, and establish grounds for systemic reform. She looked down the table. Ms. Ellison, thank you for being here. You may begin. Mara stood. No notes, no script, just memory and the truth she never asked for but could never forget. I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because no one listened when it mattered. She looked around the room. You all have read the reports, seen the footage, heard the testimonies, but you haven't seen the impact. She pointed toward the gallery. That's the impact. Mothers, sons, teachers, drivers, people who walk through life hoping not to be rewritten. She spoke for 15 minutes straight about the arrest, the courtroom, the aftermath, the letters she receives weekly, the people who still haven't gotten a day in court. She ended with this: you don't need another task force, you need courage. Then she sat down. There was silence, but not the kind that shrinks, the kind that swells. Then came the questioning. Councilwoman Reed, a skeptic in a navy blazer, leaned forward. You've made serious claims. You're essentially accusing the system of being complicit in abuse. Mara didn't blink. I'm not accusing it, I'm describing it. Reed pressed on. What do you propose? What does accountability actually look like to you? Mara folded her hands. It looks like cases reopened, officers retrained, complaints independently investigated, and people who lie on reports held to the same standards as the people they arrest. Applause rippled from the back. The chairwoman tapped the mic again. Order. But the tone had shifted. Again. The police union president, Carl Vexley, stepped forward, red-faced, tense. He called her dangerous, said her story had damaged morale, that it demonized an entire profession. By year 2, Mara Ellison had become something she never wanted to be, a symbol, not a person, not a name, a cause, a hashtag. A quote repeated in tweets and headlines and protest signs. People wore her face on shirts, said her name like it came with weight, like it meant truth. But symbols carry something people don't talk about. Burden. The pressure to always say the right thing, to represent everyone's pain, even when you're still healing from your own, to be strong, even when your voice trembles. And she was trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight. She still couldn't walk into a store without stares, still received letters with no return address, some thanking her, some warning her. She had a security team now, a staff, a foundation, and still, she woke up at 3 a.m. some nights from dreams of gravel and flashing lights. They were planning a national summit, civil rights leaders, lawmakers, activists, policy experts, and they wanted her to lead it. Jordan, her former attorney, now legal director of EchoFile, sat across from her with a coffee she hadn't touched. You don't have to do this, I know, she said, but you're thinking about it anyway. I'm thinking maybe we finally have enough people listening. He nodded. But what if they only want your voice until the message gets hard? That was the truth of it. They loved her when she told her story, but stories are personal. Policy is political, and not everyone wanted the system to change, even if they cried at her trial. Still, she agreed. The summit was scheduled in Baltimore. 5,000 registered attendees, live streamed to millions, 3 days of workshops, roundtables, speeches. Day 1 belonged to Mara. She stood behind the podium in a white blazer and calm fire. Cameras zoomed in, phones recorded, and she spoke the way only someone who had lived it could. I didn't want this spotlight, I didn't chase it. It found me in a courtroom that didn't believe me, in a system that tried to break me, in a country that teaches you silence is safer. She paced the stage slowly, but silence doesn't protect, it just delays the storm. She laid out her vision: independent review boards, transparent misconduct databases, community elected oversight, panels. She ended with, "Justice isn't a verdict, it's what happens after." The crowd stood, applauded. Some cried, and across the country networks replayed it every hour. Commentators debated her. Some praised, some accused her of attacking law enforcement, the usual. But now she had a platform that didn't shake. She flew home exhausted, dropped her bag in the hallway, shoes still on, phone off. She didn't want the noise. Just a moment to be Mara, not the woman who spoke for everyone else. Her apartment was quiet, books stacked in corners, frames still unpacked. Life paused somewhere between movement and memory. She opened the window, let the night air in, and breathed until her phone buzzed and buzzed again. She ignored it, then saw Jordan's name. She answered. "There's a case in Ohio," he said. "A teenage boy, wrongfully detained, footage tampered with. They're reaching out." Mara closed her eyes. "When's the trial?" 2 weeks. "They want you to speak." She said nothing, just stared out the window at the street below. A part of her wanted to rest, to say no, to stop holding the line. But another part, the part, still kneeling on gravel, still hearing the words, "Stop resisting," that part couldn't stay silent. 2 weeks later, she was on a plane. New city, same fight. The courtroom was smaller, local, tired walls. Old judge, the boy's name was Kirill James, 17. Arrested after walking home from work. Police said he fit a description. He said he didn't. They searched him, found nothing. Still held him, charged him with resisting. The body cam footage was missing minutes, but his mother recorded it on her phone. A silent protest from the sidewalk, and when the judge saw it, when the jury saw it, the case fell apart like paper in water. Mara didn't speak in court. She waited outside, sat next to Kirill's mother on the steps, held her hand when the verdict came in. "Not guilty," the mother cried. Mara didn't. She'd cried for this story too many times. Now she just nodded and let her hand speak for her. Back home, she started to write again, a book, not just her story, but everyone's. The people who wrote her, the ones who didn't survive their trials, the ones still waiting for theirs. It wasn't a memoir, it was a record, and the title, Erased and Remembered. Publishers lined up. She chose the smallest one, the one that wouldn't ask her to dilute a single sentence. It hit shelves 6 months later. It hit the bestseller list in 2 days. One night she got a message on Instagram from a girl in Chicago. Said she'd read the book in one sitting. Said her father was arrested last year. Said they told her he resisted, but now she was questioning it. The message ended with, "I'm scared, but your story gave me a blueprint." Mara closed the app, set the phone down, and cried. Not out of pain, not out of fear, out of something rarer. Relief. She was still tired, still human, still healing. But she wasn't alone, and that meant everything. They called it the civil oversight trial of the decade, because this time it wasn't one cop, not one precinct, not one case. It was the system itself, on trial. And the woman walking into court that morning, Mara Ellison, still steady, still silent, still carrying the weight of stories that were never supposed to survive. Echofile had built the case for 2 years, pulled together 46 separate incidents, 21 families, 4 departments, thousands of pages of sealed complaints, whistleblower leaks, audio clips, body cam gaps, all building to this, a civil rights class action against a police union and the city government that shielded it. Mara didn't file it, but she was its spine. The courtroom was massive, federal, tiered seating, cameras everywhere. Marble walls like monuments to a system that rarely made room for truth, unless truth kicked the door down first. Jordan was back, now lead counsel, grey at his temples, fire in his eyes. "You good?" he asked her that morning. Mara smiled. as good as the truth can be. The prosecution table was crowded. 3 attorneys, multiple laptops, stacks of binders. Across from them sat the defense, city attorneys, union reps, legal muscle thick with money and arrogance. They thought they could win with paper, but paper doesn't bend memory. And this courtroom had heard Mara's voice before. The judge was Arlo Beam, federal, firm, fair. He didn't lean left, didn't lean right, just leaned into the law. Proceed. Jordan called the first witness, Casey Marlowe, widow, husband shot in their driveway, wrong address, no charges ever filed. She spoke quietly, said the apology letter arrived 6 months later, typed, generic, no name on it. I framed it, she said, to remember what silence looks like. Next came Jabari Trent, teen, falsely detained, graduated late because of his record. He said, they said I looked like someone. I said I was someone. They didn't listen. Then came the data, spreadsheets, internal logs, charts showing how often officers reused the same phrases in arrest reports, resisted, reached, feared for safety, like a template for control. The defense tried to poke holes, said it was cherry-picked, said it was circumstantial, said the system wasn't perfect, but not malicious. And then Jordan stood. Your Honor, we call Mara Ellison. She hadn't planned to testify, but plans never mattered to truth. She walked slowly, not for drama, for presence, swore in, took the stand, and looked at a room full of people waiting for her to speak. She didn't talk about her case. They'd all heard it. She talked about what came after, the nights she spent in rooms with people who hadn't been believed, the weight of carrying names that the news never said, the file's echo file kept so someone, somewhere, would remember. This case isn't about bad apples, she said. It's about a tree that lets rot grow at the roots, and one calls it tradition. She talked about her visit to a juvenile center, a girl who asked, if I scream in court, will they hear me better? And Mara had to answer, sometimes they only hear you when you stop screaming and start fighting back with paper. She read letters from survivors, from parents, from people who lost jobs, lost homes, lost dignity to a system that never blinked. Then she ended with this, you're not judging a department. You're judging the value of a name once it's been stamped with guilt before truth ever gets a turn. She stepped down to a silence that burned. 3 more days, more evidence, more stories. The weight of collective memory crushing a defense, built on denial. Then closing arguments, Jordan's voice cut clean. This isn't just about what happened. It's about what was allowed. And what we allow becomes who we are. Deliberation took 2 days. Mara didn't wait in the courthouse. She went to the park, the same bench where she used to sit before all of this. Birds chirped, children played, and then her phone rang. Verdict's in, Jordan said. You should hear it in person. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. The judge entered. The jury filed in. A forewoman stood. In the matter of Ellison et al. V. City of Lindale. And Lindale Police Union. A breath. We find in favor of the plaintiffs. Applause burst, cut short by the judge's gavel, but it didn't matter. The truth had won. On paper, on record, with real consequences. The court ordered full release of misconduct records overhaul. Of complaint review systems, 8.3 million in damages across all plaintiffs, a federal monitor installed for 5 years. No one clapped outside. They stood, not to celebrate, to witness. Because some stories are too heavy for cheering. They need stillness to land. Mara walked through the crowd. No interviews, no fanfare, just nods, tears, handshakes. The quiet exchange of recognition between those who've carried injustice and those who finally saw it. At home, her inbox flooded. Calls, requests, media, books, films. She answered none of them. She called her mother. They didn't talk about the trial, just soup recipes. And how it might rain. Because after all that, she was still someone's daughter. Echo file went international. partnered with coalitions in Brazil, UK, South Africa. Truth has no borders. One night, Mara sat in a candlelit room with every light off. She pulled out a stack of names, people she'd met, people she'd fought for. She read them aloud, one by one, whispered them into the dark like prayers, then burned them, not to forget, to release. And she smiled, because for the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for justice, she was part of it. They say some stories fade. Time dulls the details, people forget. Names get pushed down by the next headline, the next hashtag, the next wave. But Mara Ellison's story, it didn't fade. It grew, not like fire, like roots. The federal trial changed laws. But Mara never wanted laws. She wanted lives to be seen, heard, respected, to be lived without fear of being rewritten by a report signed in someone else's hand. 3 years after the verdict, Mara stopped giving interviews, not out of retreat, out of choice, because she had said enough. And now it was time for others to speak. EchoFile had grown into an entire movement. 12 full-time staff, 75 city partnerships, a legal branch, a media branch, and a youth program. And at the heart of it, not Mara, but her blueprint. She taught them how to build it, and then stepped back. She started teaching, guest lecturing. First, then workshops, then full courses, not on law, on resistance. Systems don't fear noise, she told her students. They fear documentation. She showed them how to file, how to demand, how to resist legally, loudly, without ever raising your voice. One student asked her, "Do you think it'll ever end?" She smiled sadly. "No, but I think we'll stop bleeding alone." In that same year, the city unveiled the Mara Ellison Center for Justice Reform. She didn't attend the ribbon cutting. She sent a note instead. "Don't build this in my name. Build it in memory of every voice you didn't hear the first time." A new mayor was elected, ran on reform, won by a landslide, used EchoFile's platform to draft new public safety policies. And when she took office, the first person she thanked wasn't a donor. It was Mara, but Mara didn't want credit. She wanted consistency. She stayed in the city, but moved to the edge of it. Quiet street, trees lining both sides. No security detail, just a porch and a peace that came not from forgetting, but from knowing she had done what she came to do. And then, one day, she got a letter, stamped, folded by hand, no return address. Inside was a single line: "You saved my daughter. You don't even know her, but you saved her." Mara didn't cry. She folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer next to a copy of the first motion she ever filed by herself. 2 pages, no legal training, just truth and determination. She kept those pages, not as trophies, as reminders that the system didn't grant her power. It tried to bury her, and she became the roots. 5 years later, news anchor on a Sunday morning show leans into the camera. We begin today's broadcast with the announcement that Mara Ellison, former civil rights advocate and founder of EchoFile, has been awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor for civic leadership. She's not there. She declined the ceremony, sent her former clients instead. They stood in her place: Camille, Jabari, Delia, Kirel, and the girl from Chicago. Each stepped forward and held the medal not like an award, but like a story that still needed chapters. The president read her words aloud. Legacy is not one name remembered, it's many voices no longer silenced. Somewhere far from that podium, on that same quiet street, Mara sat on her porch, tea in hand, feet up, watching the trees sway like justice, finally learning how to breathe. And across the world, in classrooms, in courtrooms, in street corners and phone screens, her words played again. "You don't need another task force, you need courage." Mara never stopped writing. She just stopped signing her name. Now she lets others sign theirs, because that's the real win, not just surviving the system, but replacing it with something better. The end.